Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Sara Espinosa. I'm the manager for training and development at ISAC. I have a couple of housekeeping items before I hand things over to our presenter this morning. We will record the session as you heard the message right now. We're sharing our recordings on our on-demand page. So we'll share that in the next couple of weeks. If you experience any issues throughout the webinar with your audio, you can switch from the computer option to the call me option for audio so that you can take the call on your phone. Please use the Q&A. It should be at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's a question mark button. If you click on that, that's the Q&A feature for this webinar. You can enter your questions there. That'll give you a quicker response since all of the hosts and panelists are able to see that. So we'll be able to answer those questions. To see any additional webinars, you can visit our website, and we will offer CE and PD hours for this webinar. We'll have instructions for it at the end. Another reminder is just for the questions, try to be as general as you can so that we can get through as many of those questions as possible. And we will start just off with a brief overview, and then we'll jump right into the Q&A. So I'm going to hand things over to Tommy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our FAFSA Q&A with ISAC. Hopefully this gives you guys all an opportunity to have any sort of questions you have regarding FAFSA simplification answered. We've been providing a lot of webinars on these topics throughout, I'd say the last 8 months or so, throwing a lot of information your way. So hopefully this kind of gives you a chance to sort of digest some things and get some questions answered from us. Excuse me. So I'd like to just go ahead and start off a little bit about ISAC as an agency. There are times where we have first-timers coming to our webinars, haven't really heard a lot about us as an agency and what we do. So I want to provide our mission statement here that we do provide Illinois students with information and assistance to help make education, whatever that might be, beyond high school, more accessible and affordable. We also administer a variety of scholarships and grants to our students across our state. Whether that be a veterans type grant, a teacher's grant, scholarship, education, tuition waivers for special education, etc. There's a wide variety of scholarships and grants that we administer. They seem to grow the more years that I'm here at the agency, so it's quite interesting. But at least in terms of us here on the training team and all the panelists you see here in front of you today, we provide a lot of professional development offerings on navigating the financial aid process, specific resources for our underrepresented students, as well as webinars and trainings on understanding the student loan process, repayment, forgiveness plans, etc. So I just want to walk you through our agenda for today. I'm just going to go through a couple of general type things to make us sort of all aware and kind of get our brains flowing here before we open things up for question and answer. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Open Issues Alert page. For those of you who are not aware, on FSA's site, they do have what they've called an Open Key Issues Alert page. And they pretty much update this on a daily basis if there are updates. We typically see things change on here on a weekly basis, but it can be updated on a daily basis here. I have it in front of me every day. I refresh it to kind of take a look at if there's anything that's been changing for issues that they are aware of. And if there are workarounds to those issues within the application, or if there are not workarounds to those issues, and just to say, we're aware of it, there's nothing we can do right now, we're working on a solution. So we're going to talk through some of those common issues. Then we're going to go through some frequently asked questions that we at ISAC have received in the field, talk through some of those things. You might have had these questions on your mind. And then I'll turn things back over to Sarah. She'll go ahead and open up things for question and answer. Have those questions be populated in the Q&A function on the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will go through and answer them live for you out loud here from a variety of our panelists. So we'll go ahead here and dive into the Open Issues page, and I provided that link at the bottom of your screen. It's just on the FSA Partners site in the Knowledge Center. Quite frankly, an easy Google search with FSA Open Issues Alert page can get you to the right source. Just make sure you're on the FSA site, the .gov site, and that will go ahead and take you to all of those open issues. So these are some of the issues that they have identified that they know about, but they do have workarounds. And a lot of these is just the site being kind of buggy and it's just taking some additional extra steps to get through some portions of the application. For example, this first one here, we have a student who incorrectly selects that they are an eligible non-citizen. They go ahead, they complete their portion of the application, they get through a lot of the demographic information, and they realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm not an eligible non-citizen. I'm actually a U.S. citizen. So maybe they manually navigate back to that portion and they change the citizenship answer. When they do that, it stops them from submitting the FAFSA once they correct that citizenship status here, right? So this is sort of a bug. It does not allow them to then proceed and complete the application. The workaround for this, the Department of Ed has sort of come up with, is just to delete that current application, right? There is in the hamburger menu, when you first log in to the application, on the top right-hand portion of your screen, that 3 little dots, it does give folks the option to delete the application entirely and just start over. And for some of these situations like this citizenship issue, that's been the best way to kind of just refresh, restart, complete a new application, and make sure that the citizenship question is answered correctly. The second known issue here is we've a student or a parent who returns to a signed and saved FAFSA, but still requiring another contributor's information on the application. And when they realize they get back into the application, they realize the signatures have been deleted. And we've seen this with some other types of situations as well. I remember back in January, they released an issue about, it was deleting the country question, for example. So I would just highly recommend double, triple check. When you get to the review page with students and families, a lot of folks that we work with tend to just kind of skip through that information. They think that everything on there is correct. They know what they did. They just kind of scroll down, hit continue, and they go ahead and try and submit the application. Very important because of how buggy the system and the application has been for us, that you double and triple check this types of information, because it's deleting signatures at times. Perhaps it's deleting other things. Just want to make sure everything's on there is correct. FSA has identified this. They know it's buggy. They're just saying, just re-sign the FAFSA, double check that signatures are in place. The third known issue here is that the college names are sometimes truncated. And it's very difficult to distinguish between which college is actually correct, especially when they have multiple programs. I ran into this issue in January when I was with a family. I think I was searching for the University of Illinois, Chicago, and 28 different universities of Illinois at Chicago popped up. And I was very confused because I have worked in FAFSAs before for about 4 or 5 years. And typically that's not the case. Usually it's 1 or 2. I can find the right one. It's usually pretty easy to identify. And for this one, there was 28 of them or something like that. It was crazy. And I was very confused on exactly what was the right institution. So the Department of Ed is aware of this. They said the best way to do this now is to really search by federal school code. Now, a lot of folks don't know what the institution's federal codes are off the top of their heads. I don't know how you would. I know I don't. That's totally okay. FSA has released all of those federal student codes. They have a link there provided for you. It is on their website. Also, we have found on the training team that it actually is a pretty easy Google search. Just search those federal school codes. They pop up right away. So that's been a nice way to make sure that the institution in which you're planning to submit on the application for students when they're doing this, best way to search is by the federal school code. Some additional issues they know about that do have workarounds. Maybe we have a user, for example, who has changed their filing status from married filing jointly to married filing separately. But they've done this after their spouse's information has already been entered, right? The problem with this is that when you change from filing statuses from jointly to separate, the separated individual now needs to be invited to the application to log in with their own FSA ID, complete their portion, right? Give consent and sign. Well, when they do this and they make this change after the information's been entered, the invite page doesn't show up at all, even though now that spouse's information is going to be required for an invitation. So the way they decided how to work around this is just kind of take some extra steps. They have to navigate back sort of that home portion when they first log in with their FSA ID, and they go to the My Activity section of their sort of home screen with their login information. There they can select Edit Contributor Information and just update the information to input that other spouse's name. Doing so effectively removes and then re-adds them as contributor, which then gives them the invitation that they need to log into the application, make sure that information's linked, go ahead and log in and go ahead and complete their portion of the application. Another known issue here we have in some cases, a parent who has started the FAFSA application on behalf of a student is unable to continue past the student information page, right? They're receiving these error messages stating, hey, there's already an application on file for their student. And parents are looking like, no, I know for a fact there's not. My student's done nothing. They haven't even created maybe their FSA ID, for example. So we know for sure like, they don't got nothing going on. I've started the form on behalf of my student as parent. I got this error message. It's not letting me continue on at all. And the workaround here that FSA has been really trying to harp on throughout this entire new FAFSA process is that students need to be the ones logging in, kind of taking control of their own application, completing their sections first, and inviting parents to be their contributors. That's how it's designed best. Now, I have worked with parents who have logged in themselves and invited students to do the application. And it has worked before, but we've seen a lot of families in situations where this error is approaching. And FSA has said, listen, we need students to start this first and invite the necessary contributors to complete their sections of the FAFSA. That's how the form works best. So that's what they've recommended. Just one final issue here for our known issues without workarounds. If we have a married student or parent who starts to enter a spouse's information, right, trying to invite them to complete their portion of the application, but then they decide to save and exit without completing that full invitation section. What happens when they go back into the form is that the contributor is not able to add that information that's required for them to get an invitation. Thus, they cannot move forward and submit their completed application. FSA said, listen, a couple extra steps that are going to be needed here for this kind of bug. You have to manually navigate back to the invite portion of the application, delete everything, and kind of restart that whole section and submit contributor information in its entirety. Get through that portion if you need to complete that application later. Again, if those things kind of happen too, and it's still kind of not working for you, I think one of the previous workarounds we mentioned about just navigating out of the application into that My Activity portion of the FSA when you first log in with your FSA ID and updating contributor information in there perhaps is another way to work around this. All right, now I want to go ahead and highlight some of the known issues that we are aware of that do not have solutions at this time. The first one is fairly new, updated sort of at the end of February here, where some students with birth years of 2000s are just continuously being looped into the student unusual circumstance page for whatever reason, even though they don't have perhaps a unusual circumstance. And it is not allowing them to complete the application here, right? Another sort of technical little bug glitch sort of here. No workaround for this quite yet. Folks with birth years of 2000 that are running into this issue are going to have to wait until FSA has a solution. This second one here, I think, is the biggest issue when it comes to the FAFSA, at least that we have experienced in the field, right? And where a lot of our families are getting stuck. We have parents without social security numbers really having a hard time first creating FSA IDs, but more importantly, when they do get an FSA ID that is verified, they're unable to start the FAFSA form and contribute their portion on that existing application, right? Again, student can start the application themselves like they're supposed to, complete their entire section, look to invite that parent without a social security number who's got a verified FSA ID, and nothing's working, right? They can't get through it, preventing that student from submitting the application. Now, the Department of Ed did release sort of a little bit of an exception here for a workaround, only if you have students who have a strict deadline to meet for, say, an institutional renewal aid, a scholarship, whatever. Sometimes these submission dates can affect renewal different types of aid, right? So they have that announcement. I did link that there. It's quite extensive for the different steps. I didn't want to try and dive through and waste some of our time today. But if you navigate to the You're Almost There page on the application, when you go to the bottom of that page, you can hit Things You Should Know. And when you click on that, it does prompt an option now for individuals to manually input contributor information solely for the purpose of completing the application to get a submission date to count so that institutional strict deadlines or other types of aid applicants, right, that can get met and the student is then not missing any sort of renewal aid. Talk a little bit more about this when we get to some frequently asked questions, but know that's now available. It's only recommended for a very few group of students who have strict deadlines to meet. Otherwise, there is not a workaround for this yet. The FSA, Department of Ed, right, they are aware of this and are working towards folks without social security numbers getting verified for their FSA IDs, and then of course being allowed to complete their section of the application. Another known issue without a workaround is that students are unable to save or submit FAFSA forms when entering an alien registration number that ends in 0. For whatever reason, when that number ends in 0, error messages are popping up that the application has failed to save. They're now no longer able to proceed, thus they can't submit the application, right? Random bug. The Department of Ed is aware of it, not a workaround at this time. I also just want to mention a little bit here about the FSA call center here because of the issue and sort of the struggle for folks without social security numbers to get some manual verification done for their FSA IDs. We know that the way they do that and the best way to do that is by calling FSA, right? They're prompted to do so. Now, the call center is just completely overwhelmed right now. I mean, in our state alone, we have about 15,000 families who are being affected by this. So take that, times it by how many states in the whole country, right? They're swamped. And their system sometimes is designed to drop calls if they are overflooded. We've heard a lot of folks talk to us and say, hey, I'm trying to call. It won't even go through. They're just dropping me. Like, what do I do? That's by design. It's how their system is designed. We have seen if you do it earlier in the day, wait times are a little bit less, and you can then maybe get in touch, specifically if you ask for a tier 2 FSA ID specialist. That seems to, in our experiences, prompt them to actually get you someone in touch with a live operator, a customer service representative who is geared to FSA ID stuff and can give you that manual verification number that is required. We have seen folks try the chat and email and other things in the past because the call center has been sort of a nightmare here. And we have seen some individuals receive false case numbers as a result of these methods here. Some have received correct ones and some haven't here. Not the best way to recommend it here. So we are saying if you are going to go through some of these other avenues of communication, whenever you receive a case number for manual verification of an FSA ID, we have to ensure that before that case number begins, in front of it, it has the letters MANVER, standing for manual verification. If you're in touch with a live operator, you're in touch with folks in chat and the email because you're frustrated, you're trying to get in touch with someone, just ensure when you receive a case number, or you're working with a family, obviously, who's receiving this, that the manual verification acronym is in front of that case number. All right, I just want to transition to a couple of frequently asked questions that we have received in the field that maybe are on your minds. Who needs an FSA ID? Basically everyone now, right? We've talked to the extent about folks without social security numbers that process is available. So pretty much everyone needs an FSA ID, right? To sign the application and provide consent and approval. Really, our only exception here is that we have individuals who file married filing jointly. The Department of Ed and the IRS, they only need consent from one person in that situation because they filed jointly. In that situation, you really only need one parent to go in, log in with an FSA ID, and complete the application. But otherwise, everyone needs an FSA ID. Now, our contributors without a social security number, right, they do get asked a series of identity knowledge-based questions for the sole purpose of verifying their identity. They are populated from a company credit bureau called TransUnion. That does not mean a credit check has taken place. It's just, again, solely identify who they are as people. Now, if that process doesn't work, if those questions are not answered correctly, they are flagged to go through a manual verification process, right? They are prompted to contact Federal Student Aid at 1-800, right, that 433 number there, to ask to initiate this verification process. They will then receive a manual verification number, complete the attestation form, which is a funny word for verification form, and provide proof of an identity, whatever that customer service representative is requesting, right? This could be a driver's license, could be a community ID, a library card, state ID, passport, etc., whatever that customer service representative is requesting. Once they submit that attestation form and the supporting documentation, they can email it to the idverification.ed.gov email address, and then hopefully in 1 to 3 days, they get a confirmation email saying, great, we got your stuff, everything looks good, your FSA ID is verified and good to go. Now, I mentioned that little bit of a workaround with that link for issues with those, right, who cannot again, complete their section of the application because folks without a social security number has been sort of stuck, right? There's no workaround for that at this time. So that limited sort of workaround and exception that I talked about is only available for applicants that must have a FAFSA submission date to meet a critical, again, state institutional or other scholarship deadline. And of course, meaning they have required contributors who do not have an SSN. If you have students who are stuck, but they don't have any sort of strict deadlines to meet because institutions or scholarships are not being lenient for whatever reason, right? This is coming across. This is the only situation where they can do this, right? Otherwise, it's recommended to wait until FSA resolves these issues, and then these individuals can complete their portion of the application. Another common question: my family owns a business and a farm. Do I need to report it? The answer is yes, only if you are required to report investment information. Again, with the new sort of crafted exceptions for assets, not every family is going to see those investment questions on there. So if that's the case, then obviously you're not reporting any investment information. However, if you do see the investment questions and families you work with see them, then all businesses and all farms must be reported on the application. It's the net worth of those farms and businesses. We calculate net worth, current value, minus any debt owed on them. Other frequently asked questions here: when will I be able to make a correction to my FAFSA? This is sort of part of a bigger issue with processing delays, right? Students and parents cannot make corrections until FAFSAs have been successfully processed. In normal times, this takes 3 to 5 days, and you get an email letting you know, right? Letting our students and families know. However, the Department of Education has said that all these processing delays have been, of course, delayed until mid-March at the earliest. So they're not processing FAFSAs until mid-March, which then, of course, delays FAFSA submission summaries, as well as the institutional student information records, also known as ISERs, right? So FAFSAs are not going to get processed to mid-March, which then, of course, delays FAFSA submission summaries and ISERs to mid-March, not allowing institutions to package aid, of course, until later this spring. What about gap access? My school uses it, for example, right? You're talking with other individuals, and it's not up and running right now. When is it going to be available so we can view completed financial aid application data? Well, because of all these FAFSA processing delays, the information is not going to be available from ISAC to have gap access running until we receive that data from the Department of Education, right? Again, this is going to happen in mid-March, hopefully, some point, right? We rely on that data as an agency to match senior class rosters, which then get populated into gap access. So we can't have it up and running for those matches to take place until the Department of Education goes ahead and processes FAFSA data. So everything is kind of on hold right now. What about we have parents here creating their FSA ID, right? They go in, they log in, they gave consent for the direct data exchange to take place. We know that's a requirement, right? And they're still prompted to enter tax information manually. Why is that happening? I was told I got an FSA ID, I give consent, and boom, all my tax information should be transferred on the back end, right? Why am I being asked to prompt manual tax information to be given here? A couple of reasons can happen for this. Number one, they maybe created their FSA ID the exact same day they're trying to complete the application. We know the FSA has told us, right? You got to create FSA IDs prior to entering the application. The purpose of that is to let the FSA ID become verified. Then the application looks normal. If they create it the exact same day they're trying to complete the application, that's okay. They can get through the application still, but it's going to look a little different. And one of these things is prompting manual tax information to be entered. The reason being is because the direct data exchange can't pull tax information until that FSA ID has become verified. It's not uncommon where I've worked with families when this gets to this portion here, and I know they've created an FSA ID the same day. I've recommended just to save and stop here. Let's wait 1, 2, 3 days max. Make sure this FSA ID gets verified. When you re-log in and give consent, boom, you'll be past the tax information. All that information is going to be pulled, and you'll be good to go. There's no point in manually inputting the information if it's just going to get overrode and overroded in any way by the Department of Ed and the IRS. Another instance is because they filed a foreign tax return, right? IRS doesn't have those things. They can't pull it. So they're going to get prompted to enter the tax information manually and they have to, again, convert those currencies into US dollars. Another situation that might come up is that perhaps their filing status and their situation in 2022 does not reflect their personal circumstances as of today. For example, you deal with a family who filed married filing jointly in 2022. All right, gave consent, they should be pulling 22 tax information. Well, perhaps today they are divorced, right? Different situation then, right? Maybe only one parent, obviously, then is going to then putting their information on the application. So it imprompts individuals to manually input tax information then for that one parent versus the two parents for married filing jointly in 2022. Again, accurately reflecting what is true as of today. So those are some common situations you might be inputting manual tax information. All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our moderator for today's session, Sarah. She's going to go ahead and walk us through some of the questions you all have put in the Q&A. Keep them coming as we go along. Bottom right-hand corner of your screen, we're going to go ahead and try and get through as many questions as we can today. I will ask all of our panelists now on the call to please be on camera and be present with us. Thank you.
All right, thank you for those questions. We have a couple that we'll get started with. The first one says, can you delete a current application after it has been submitted? I'll go ahead and answer that one just because it's a pretty straightforward one. No, you can delete your FAFSA while it's in the process. Like if you started it, saved it, but once it's been submitted, it cannot be deleted. So if students have an incomplete FAFSA and they're having issues and somebody recommends restart it, then they can go ahead and do that. But once it's been submitted, it cannot be deleted.
Can I just add on a little bit on how to do it?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So when you're in the FAFSA itself, as long as it's not submitted yet, and you go to the top right-hand corner, there are going to be the 3 dots, and you'll see there to delete the FAFSA form, in case y'all were wondering how to do it.
Thank you. Okay, the next question says, can we, this one's just more of an, I think somebody wants that link for the parents without the SSN in the chat, so we can put that for them. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Are there any major Illinois institutions that you all are aware that have strict deadlines? Megan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any. I know that institutions are pushing back their enrollment deadlines. So many institutions in Illinois are pushing back from May 1 to go into June. I saw Western Illinois is even pushing as far as back as August. In those terms of enrollment deadlines, but financial aid deadlines, no, I'm not aware of that or have a pretty strict deadline in case they need something. But I did work with a family that their student was applying to the University of Iowa, and they did have a pretty strict deadline of February 15th. So that was in that case. There may be, if you have a student that is applying for outside of Illinois, but they have stricter deadlines. But I would absolutely encourage your students to be contacting the financial aid office, or if the financial aid office hasn't already emailed students or put something in their student portal to say if their financial aid deadlines have been moved. But I'm not personally aware of any schools in terms of financial aid deadlines, but yes, in terms of enrollment deadlines, those are being moved. But again, it depends on the institution as well.
Thank you. Tommy, if you want to take this one, it says, why are you recommending not to do the workaround for everyone? I'm assuming this is related to the workaround for parents who don't have a social security number.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just kind of highlighting what FSA has recommended for these individuals to do, that they're saying these steps should only be used if you have an applicant who has to have a FAFSA submission date to meet a critical state, institutional, or other scholarship organization aid deadline here. And of course, they have required contributors who do not have a social security number, right? The reason being for this anyways, because they're going to have to make this correction going forward anyway. This is only for the purpose of submitting basically an incorrect FAFSA to get that submission date so that they can receive any sort of renewal aid. And then once these things get processed successfully, they're going to have to go back in and correct this portion of the FAFSA. So FSA has only said these are the individuals who they're recommending doing this workaround for. Hopefully that clarifies what I was trying to say.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. And I think it's important to add that if they've specifically asked that it's only for students who have a critical deadline to meet, it's also important to remember that if they get an influx of applications, like way more than they anticipated, it is something that can technically still go away until they fix it. Like they've offered that solution as a temporary fix so that students who do have deadlines can actually get to those. So I think we need to be careful and make sure that we're prioritizing those applications so that they don't end up with more in the backlog and then end up having to kind of stop that process for everyone. And one other thing I wanted to add to Megan's question about deadlines, I've seen that at least on some of the students that I've been working with, I've seen that more from like external scholarship organizations. If you have partners, if you have a way of advocating for your students, I think that's a really good way to do so, is talking to partners. A lot of folks aren't doing it um like just like with ill will. It's more of a they're not aware sometimes when you're not specifically working with students on FAFSA completion. Sometimes it's easy to not be aware of all the changes, all the updates, all the issues. So if perhaps somebody does have a pretty hard deadline, maybe work with the students to see if you can call them up and ask if there's any flexibility for that, because I mean everyone's kind of in that tough spot this year.
There, can I add to that one thing? So the National Association for College Admission Counseling, or NACAC, they do have a full list, a pretty large list of member institutions who have moved their enrollment deadlines, as well as on this list, there are financial aid deadlines if the schools reported them. So I'm going to share that in the chat here for everyone. You can search by Illinois, but other states as well. So for one example, I'm right there right now, like Illinois College, which is down in Jacksonville, they have a financial aid priority date by of March 15th. And so, but some do not. And so, but they do have links to their financial aid offices as well if they've updated those to if there's any deadlines there, but you all can access that. And it's free for the public to access as well.
Thank you. Um, Beth, if you want to take this one, as processing is beginning mid-March, is there a deadline that the government is holding to in terms of all applications being processed by?
So they haven't indicated that there's any kind of deadline that they'll hold to in terms of the applications being processed by that time. They have indicated, however, that they are going to process those online applications before they start processing those paper forms, and that is part of why we're encouraging students to get those online forms in if they're able to do that, rather than doing those paper forms that we've heard some students trying to do just because of the issues that have been happening. So once those get processed, starting in that mid-March that FSA has said that they'll start to process by, there's really no idea of when exactly they'll be done with that. It just will depend on the application volume.
Thank you. And then it's also important to remember that the entire cycle for financial aid goes all the way through June 30th of 2025, which is the last day of the academic year. Obviously, we wouldn't want our students waiting until then, but there is still time to fill out a FAFSA. Next one, Dada, if you want to take this one, when do y'all think students will receive financial aid award letters or financial aid offers? So like an estimate just off of your personal experience.
Yeah, so I actually talked with a lot of admissions counselors and financial aid people, and they discussed trying to get that done as fast as they can. They projected mid-April to try to get those out to students. But obviously we cannot be for sure, but that is our estimate.
Thank you. Anna, when will information be available in Gap Access?
So as soon as they start processing those and we start receiving that information, it'll be made available on Gap Access. So if they do, as they said, we'll start sending that information mid-March. We would start to receive that information.
Thank you. Perfect. I think this one was already answered. Is that the same for colleges? When will colleges start receiving the FAFSA data? Anna, if you want to take it as a follow-up.
It's the same for colleges. The federal student aid has said that they're going to be sending that information mid-March. So it would be a mix of students receiving and being able to make the corrections, receiving their information, and then also the colleges and also any other institution that might need it as well. So they'll start to get that. And then I wanted to add into Data's question about when the financial aid offers are going to be going out. We also have to keep in mind on the back end of things, the financial aid offices, this is also something new for them too. So they have been working with their IT teams or their platform to update the software for that formula. So it's not just when we'll receive the information from federal student aid, it's also on the back end of things, depending on the software that they have.
Thank you. Let me see. Oh, this is a good one. When will corrections be available for students? So if students have to make a correction right now, the process is not available, right? So is there an expected time frame when they'll be able to make those corrections? Tommy, if you want to take that.
Can you read that one more time? Sorry, I was typing something.
Yeah, when will students be able to start corrections or to make corrections?
So students can't start corrections until FAFSAs are processed, right? And as we all kind of indicated for a lot of these things that we're waiting on, that's not going to happen until mid-March. Hopefully they start right away in mid-March processing FAFSAs. Again, in normal times, this took 3 to 5 days. Whenever they start processing these FAFSAs in March, students receive a confirmation email saying, hey, your FAFSA has successfully processed. And then at that point, students can go ahead and log in, make their FAFSA correction for whatever that is they need to do. And then hopefully, again, if things return to normal times, it takes another 3 to 5 days for that correction to successfully process and get updated on the school's end.
Thank you. Let me see. Let me check through the Q&A. If a student's application is still processing at the time of graduation, what should we do? Do they still meet the Illinois FAFSA requirement? Megan, do you need me to repeat it? The students.
I gotcha. Yeah, I hear. Sorry, I was typing. Yes, because if a student, once the student submits their FAFSA, it's considered a submission date. And so that date is linked. And so when it loads in on Gap Access, and this is under the assumption, right, that the student's name, their name matches what's in Gap Access. Okay. And so once their information matches from the FAFSA data that we get from the Department of Education, and we use that to match with your senior class rosters, and it will show up in GAP, then yes. So even if the student's FAFSA is still processing, as long as it's been submitted, then we go based on that submission date for the graduation requirement, as well for similar stuff. If you have on that flip side, you have a student who's completing an opt-out form through the student portal, it's based on the submission date, right? So as long as their information matches in Gap Access that we have from your class rosters, then it will come through as long as it's in there, and you can download that Excel file to show who has or has not completed a financial aid application or an opt-out form. But again, that's the assumption that the names do match. If they don't on Gap Access, and you're saying you have a student that's showing you they have a confirmation email, hey, it did get submitted and it's just now waiting to be processed at that point, and you're saying, okay, it's not showing up in Gap Access because it will load daily for you if you have access to Gap. What you can do is to make sure that their birthday matches, the name. Sometimes students have 2 last names, right? Or their spaces, right? Those kinds of things. So, but yes, it will. They still meet the graduation requirement because we go based on the submission date.
Thank you. Let's see. So I think this is a critical one that for some stuff that changed for this year's FAFSA. Dada, if you want to take it, it's if dad claims student on the taxes, do we report dad's information? And I'm assuming this is like I'm assuming this is like off of a 2-parent household, but it doesn't specify. If dad claims students on if a dad claims the student on their taxes, is that the information we're reporting? Are we reporting just dad, or how does that work? Can you talk a little bit about whose information gets reported on the FAFSA this year?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just assuming with this question, either, well, we don't know whether it's a 2-parent or 1-parent household, but for who's reported as a parent, it doesn't necessarily matter who the parent is claiming on the taxes. It is which parent is providing the most financial support for the student this year. So that's the big change. So if the dad is the one that provides the most support for that student and they are the one that claims that student on their taxes, then yes, that parent would be the one that they put on their FAFSA.
Thank you. Let's see. I think this one was kind of addressed, but I think it's important to fully go back to this question. If you want to take it, Beth, it says, should students complete a paper FAFSA if parents don't have an SSN? And that kind of ties in a little bit to the workaround that Tommy talked about.
Yeah, so we're encouraging students to still do the online form, and we know that there are a lot of students who are frustrated with the process, and so they're trying to go to the paper form. The reality is that those online forms are going to get processed first before those paper forms, and so we want students to have their information in as soon as possible. FSA has indicated that they're working on this fix for parents who don't have that social security number, and they're going to have that by mid-March. So they will then be able to go in and complete their form. Now, in the instance where you've got a student who has a deadline that they really need to meet before that workaround is going to be available for families to go in and have those FSA IDs created without their social security numbers. There is that workaround where they're basically going to go in, add those contributors without those socials in there so that they're not verifying those identities through that process that's not available. They'll then have to enter in that information manually. That's the workaround for those students who have those deadlines. But that just means they're going to have to go back in and make a correction once that process is available, which again is going to be mid-March, that process is available. Those start getting processed. So it's still going to be that somebody has to go in and make a correction. It's not necessarily that the student wants to do that paper form. That federal tax information is still going to get overridden with whatever they put manually, whether they do that on the paper form or on the online form doing that manual workaround.
Thanks, Beth. Olivia, can you talk a little bit about some of the supports that ISAC offers and how people can or families can get in touch with an ISAC rep, from the ISAC core? I know sometimes students, parents are not able to attend the FAFSA workshop at their school, or they might need some additional assistance. Can you talk a little bit about what we have as far as support services or just assistance?
The ISAC core is available, so they're near peer mentors, recent college graduates that have been extensively trained to help with the college going process, including during this time with financial aid. Any questions that the students may have, they could do it hybrid, in person, virtually, whatever is convenient for the students and the parents, and they are throughout the state. I will post in the Q&A the link to be able to find them, because you type in the zip code for your area and a picture with contact information for them pops up. If you're looking for someone that specifically speaks a different language, you can see if they're there, or once you contact them, ask them for a specific type of rep. Especially if you're Spanish speaking and you want to make sure that your parents can participate and be able to answer some of those questions. All of these services are completely free. And so we encourage you to reach out to them because they're accessible to everyone. And the link is going to be in the chat, but it's also located in the student portal on our website.
Thank you. Megan, this is an interesting one. I'll give you this one. Last time we called the FSA ID line, the recording said we could send a parent signature page. Can you provide us with more information about this?
Yeah. So if you're familiar with how students and families completed the 23-24 FAFSA, is that families, if they did not have or parents specifically did not have an FSA ID because they did not have a social, they could not create an FSA ID last year, right? So what they had to do was submit a signature pages. signature pages on their own. Sometimes they got lost in the mail or took a little time to process. So that is specific to the 23-24 years form. For 24-25, everyone has to have an FSA ID. Okay. And so Tommy talked about that workaround earlier. I mean, we've talked about that of how that process they have to do if and only if, right, they have the a deadline to meet and they need to get that in. Otherwise, they need to wait. It's okay for them to wait for those families who don't have socials for the parent or parents to continue to wait. But the parent signature page is specific to the 23-24 FAFSA. And so if you have a student that is starting school now, like right in March of 24, say you had a mid-year grad, your senior high school student, and they want to enroll in classes for this upcoming summer too through the local community college, and they complete the 23-24 FAFSA, and their parent does not have a social, at that point, then they would need to submit a signature page. But the 24-25 FAFSA, right, is specific to the FSA IDs that everyone has to have one. But yeah, so the signature pages will no longer be in existence after the 23-24 FAFSA closes. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I like that you pointed out that difference because I'll bring up this question just based off of an interaction with a student earlier in the week. But does the IRS data retrieval tool still exist, or how does tax information get imported into the FAFSA this year?
Yeah, so it's it's in this kind of transition year that we're in, that we're all in. So for the 23-24 FAFSA, the IRS data retrieval tool does still exist. It's still loaded into that application, and students and families are able to use that. But when a family goes in to complete their 24-25 FAFSA, and they are not going to see the IRS data retrieval tool. Now, you may be new to your role and you're like, what is an IRS data retrieval tool? What are these big these words you're telling us that I've never seen before? If you're unfamiliar with that it's okay. The data retrieval tool is a way for families to import their taxes directly from the IRS onto the FAFSA application. What now happened, and that was for the 23-24 FAFSA form. For the 24-25 FAFSA form, due to the law changes that federal student aid had to make, is that now everyone provides consent. So for those of you who have done this several years now, maybe you're like, great, no more entering your addresses for these things. Every single person, the student, including the parent or parents, need to provide consent to have their tax information directly transferred from the IRS to the Department of Education. So there's no case in which what will happen is that parents need to enter addresses to confirm anything. All of that information is already with the IRS. So the department, once the consent is provided, the department's going to go say, okay, great, we have this consent for I'm going to use Beth here for an example, Beth and her spouse. We're going to go talk to the IRS, the department will. Hey, we're looking for tax information for 2022 for Beth and her spouse. IRS is going to say, yes, we do have their tax return information on file. And then they're going to transfer it over directly to the department, and then the department's going to move forward. Okay. So that is specific to 24-25. But yes, the IRS data retrieval tool is not available on the 24-25 FAFSA, but it is in existence still, just as we round out the year for the 23-24 form.
Thanks, Megan. Oh, did you want to add to that, Tommy?
Yeah, if I can just talk a little bit more about the consent piece. I presented at a conference yesterday and I had this question come up of just, what if folks just don't want to give consent? I mean, you're telling me it's required, but what's the workaround for that? Then there is no workaround, right? All contributors putting their information on the application must give consent. It doesn't matter if folks didn't file taxes or not. That's okay if they didn't. The IRS, like Megan was just kind of describing, just will say, hey, like, we got this on file, here you go, or we don't, and that's it. And that's okay. Right? There's no exceptions to that. If all contributors do not give consent, student gets no aid, period. So that's a very important piece of information I'd like to kind of bring to, because we've gotten these questions from parents like, hey, like, I don't trust the government. I don't want to give consent for this. And something you can say too is like, they have this information already. They already have this. It's stuff that's already filed with the IRS. There's nothing for them to get that's more. They already have it. This is simply an agreement between the IRS and the Department of Ed For you to just click approve, it just goes IRS, transfer onto the application. They already have the information. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. I have a couple more. Anna, can you talk a little bit? I think, but this year, one of the things that's throwing off folks quite a bit is there's a field for ITINs on the FAFSA, and so it's gotten a lot of like confusion. It's created a lot of confusion as to whether that's required or like what happens if a parent doesn't have an ITIN. And I know in past years it was like never report an ITIN on the FAFSA, and so there's a lot of confusion with that. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, so with the ITIN, it's exactly right as the previous years. The ITIN is not a social security number. So that's separate. The biggest thing is separating the question from social security number. I know often they get confused and they want to enter the ITIN even on the social security number field. This is just the biggest thing with it also is that because they're asking for the ITIN, this is not this is more on the to see like the taxes side of it, because an ITIN is for tax purposes. This is not so much for them to verify their citizenship status or anything like that. It's not going to affect the student's eligibility if a parent has an ITIN or whether they don't have an ITIN. It's just a process to help on the back end of things with that, with being able to access tax information, and access might not be the best word for it. It just might be like identifying those tax records.
Can you go a little bit more into like what about for the FSA ID? Do we use the ITIN there?
No, so again, an ITIN is not a social security number. For the FSA ID, there is a question indicating that allowing individuals to select that they don't have a social security number. And when I say individuals, this is more of a contributor rule, not exactly the student, because in order for the student to be eligible for federal student aid, they do have to have a valid social security number and be an eligible citizen or eligible non-citizen. So for the purpose of creating an FSA ID, an ITIN, again, it's not a social security number. They should be selecting, I forget the exact wording of how they framed the question because they changed it. I believe they changed it. So it's a matter of what that question's asking.
Thanks, Anna. But I think this one's gonna be a hot topic once we get FAFSA's process, but is there going to be verification this year? Do we know anything about that or what that's gonna look like for students?
Yeah, for sure. So largely the Department of Ed has not, come out with, changing verification, but I think school to school, they have decided to attempt to reduce verification, especially when it comes to income information and it being directly transferred from the direct data exchange. So while right now there's nothing official, I think schools are attempting to reduce verification for students.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll add to that the reason verification for income is not going to happen is or won't happen for those using the DDX, which is a direct data exchange, is because it's already considered verified information. It's coming directly from the IRS. So similarly, like with IRS data retrieval tool, where it came straight from the source, it's just a different way that it's coming from the source. So that piece won't specifically be verified, but again, like in previous years, there is chance that you could be verified for other stuff, things like that. I know there's been some changes that I think will be helpful for some of our students, especially if we work with any, unaccompanied homeless students. Now there's more people that can give that designation or that letter of determination that a student would need to show a financial aid office. So there's a lot of stuff that did change that I think will benefit students as well. And so, but with verification itself, I think we're still going to see maybe some, hopefully not as much as in previous years, because I know the FAFSA has already been overwhelming folks quite a bit. Beth, I think a question that we typically get is about in regards to ISAC deadlines. Is there a deadline for MAP? And along those lines, is there a deadline for Pell?
Yeah, so for MAP, what we have, this is funding that is need-based and it does have a limit. So we typically have a MAP suspense date. And that is something that we send out via our e-messaging. So if you're not signed up for that, we highly encourage you to sign up for that just so that you will get that information. In previous years, we've had a very delayed MAP suspense date. So that means that a lot of students were still getting that funding quite a bit later than normal. Oftentimes that tends to be in the spring. With the pushback of the date that FAFSA was released, that is obviously getting pushed back, of course, as well. And so students are still going to have access to MAP, especially since those forms have not been processed yet for students. For Pell, the deadline for that is that a student needs to get their form in before the cycle closes, which Sarah was talking about earlier. So we're looking at that June 30th date of 2025 for Pell.
Thank you, Beth. Let me see. I think I've gone through most. Let me see if I have anything else here. I do see something in the Q&A. Oh, I don't think I answered this one. I don't think we answered this one live, but this question is regarding to gap access. I don't know if you want to take this one, Tommy. Is it possible to have the list of our seniors loaded to gap access now so we can verify that what you have is an accurate current list of our senior class? If errors exist, may we be allowed to correct them as well during the waiting period?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And unfortunately, that's not going to be something we were able to do early. We have to wait until we get the data from the Department of Education before we load those rosters in so that matching can happen. We do get those rosters from the State Board of Education there as well, right? So we populate that information onto Gap Access. So that's what the initial roster gets uploaded from. That's our source. Now, once that happens, you of course have the ability to manually individually edit students as you see fit, whether it's an addition, a subtraction, names, whatever that needs to be. You have that ability to manually edit individual people to ensure that there is accuracy. But there won't be anything being loaded early just for that sole purpose.
I'll take this question because I might need a little bit more input from the person asking it. It says, I fear many of our seniors and their families will simply complete the non-participation form simply to fulfill the Illinois graduation requirement. Will this affect our FAFSA challenge date? So I'm not super sure what the FAFSA challenge date is. I don't know if oh, data. Got it. Okay. The FAFSA challenge data. No, so if a student completes a non-participation form, which is available electronically this year, it will get marked in GAP once we start processing everything, just like it would with like ALTEP. But this year, now that it's electronic, if a student does complete a FAFSA afterwards, like they decide, okay, the process has been fixed, I still want to complete a FAFSA, they can still do that, and that will be marked in GAP. So, I mean, I think I understand where the concern and the fear comes from, because we have seen or heard the same from other schools. But I think it's important to just let families know, fingers crossed, everything's going to be fixed within the next couple of weeks. I know the last part that's completely missing is that piece for for students with parents who don't have a social. And they have indicated that they will start processing FAFSAs in the first half of March. Not a specific date just yet, but they've indicated first half of March. They will start with the backlog. They do have quite a few FAFSAs. They have 5 million FAFSAs on backlog that they'll need to process, and so I think it's been a learning curve, a learning process for all of us, for institutions, for the Department of Ed as well. And so I totally understand the concern. I think it's just a matter of, working with those students and parents, but it'll affect your data in terms of only if those students don't complete a FAFSA, right? Like they can go back, complete their FAFSA later on if they choose to do that, and that'll be marked off. But then with the data itself, with completion, non-participation forms don't get counted towards the completion rate. You will be able to see that. That is something that we're adding to our website this year. So in that page where you're able to see the full list of schools with like whether they're gold, silver, platinum, bronze, etc. It usually has the percentage of FAFSA completion. You'll also be able to see the percentage of non-participation forms because ideally that FAFSA completion plus the non-participation forms should give 100% for your school, right? And so that'll give you a better picture of where you're at with completion. So only if the student just doesn't fill anything out other than the non-participation form, that'll stay as on the non-participation percentage versus if they do go back in, it will get marked as a FAFSA completion. All right, and I think that was the last question that we had and that we have time for. So I do want to thank our panelists, which I failed miserably at introducing, but this is part of the training team that that offers trainings for counselors, for mentors, for anyone providing direct support to students across the state. So it's a small team, but small but mighty. So we do cover the entire state. There's a couple folks missing, but if you have questions, you can always reach out. I'm going to hand things over back to Tommy so he can just briefly go over the instructions for those of you that need CEs and PD hours.
Everyone close your eyes for a bit. We're gonna get there, and there we go. All right, so I did just put the link into the chat for the Survey Monkey. Just gonna put it in there again, so hopefully that pops up on your end. Again, bottom right-hand corner of your screen, little bubble to insert and hit that chat button. The Survey Monkey link will be there for you all to provide feedback on today's session, completing that evaluation. You can request your CE and PD hours there. The deadline to complete this will be at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday, March 5th. If you are specifically requesting PD hours, please ensure that you submit your Illinois Educator Identification Number. If we don't see that EIN number in the evaluation, we cannot award you PD hours. Give us a few weeks to get these processed and sent to you completed. We don't have an automated system here where these things kind of happen on the back end. We kind of have to do this ourselves manually, one by one. Sometimes it takes us a little bit of time. So be patient with us if you can, and we would definitely get you to those forms in a week or two. Again, evaluation, bottom right-hand corner, hit that Survey Monkey link. You have until the end of the day on Tuesday, March 5th. As always, if we did not answer your questions today, if you have questions later, you can email us at any time. We are happy to assist you with anything you might be curious about as we move forward here in the financial aid season.